Our next speaker is Peter Orpin, and he probably doesn't need any introduction to any of you. He's been working on Johne's disease for probably longer than he cares to remember. He's a member of the Park Veterinary Group in Leicester, and he's also a special lecturer in Nottingham University, and he's one of the two founders of My Healthy Herd, an online program for Johne's control. So he's talking today about experiences of developing a commercial solution to Johne's control in the UK.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. This is probably your 63rd PowerPoint presentation, if you've been to every single one of them. Hopefully it's not your 63rd pint of Guinness, and you'll still be with me at the end of the 10 minutes. What I'd like to sort of take you through is a bit of a journey we've had in the UK in terms of trying to manage Johne's disease. And we experienced a rise in Johne's disease after foot and mouth. And this is really because of the movement of animals into herds where there was high risk of spread. And this expansion and intensification of the dairy industry has really prompted a problem which is now under more control than it was. Certainly what we find is that the clinical disease is rare. What we see much more of is the preclinical cows, and these ones are often removed, they're culled for other reasons, and this can end up with an underestimate of the true impact of Johne's disease in the herds. And we have effectively almost like a pyramid of infection, where the clinical cows can be seemingly a distraction if you're not careful, and the economic loss is occurring below this, the tip of the pyramid. And it's a bit of a hobby horse of mine, is that the economic costing of Johne's disease sometimes is not done correctly in my view. We often sort of measure the direct costs and indirect costs, but really the most important ones are the consequential losses if the disease is not properly controlled. We can actually end up with a circle of doom in the herd where basically retaining those high-risk cows will actually mean that the rails actually come off the farm altogether, and this can actually sort of bankrupt the farmer. So it's quite a serious disease if it gets out of control, certainly in our farming system. I think also there's sometimes an underestimate of the actual culling costs and the differential cost that between sort of the emergency culls and planned culls are often used as a way to incentivize farmers to commit to any testing programs. So it's very important that the industry appreciates those true costs. What are the drivers for the Johne's engagement plan? Really, we wanted to carry on further improving the health and welfare of the dairy cows within the country and obviously deliver economic benefits where those were possible. But the actual programme was really trying to provide a framework. There was lots of individual activity, and we wanted to try and coalesce the enthusiasm in a structured way so that we could actually tackle the disease more coherently. The final reason is obviously there's always this potential risk, as Mike Collins alluded to this morning, about potential zoonotic risk, so we wanted to try and get ahead of the game. So Dairy UK, the body is responsible for the whole supply chain from the process of collecting it from the farm right the way through to the retailer, and they actually had a conference in 2010, and they got Soren Nielsen across and a variety of other speakers, and they kicked this sort of whole process into action, and they set up what's called a Johne's Action Group, and this is a group of processors and vets and enthusiastic individuals who wanted to commit to the programme. Okay, so what was the objective of our programme? I think it's quite important to understand that from the outset. The long-term objectives of the Johne's management plan for the UK were this: to control and then reduce the incidence of Johne's disease in dairy cattle with the long-term objective of eliminating the disease if it becomes technically and economically feasible to do so. So we're looking at a disease reduction programme. That's the priority. We want to sort of encourage good levels of risk management on farms. So these are the sort of tenets we've sort of tried to adopt. We want to engage all the dairy farmers. We don't want to just make it a solution for the elite or the minority. We wanted to have a situation where it was based on a predict and prevent model. We couldn't, this is quite often a common downfall with Johne's control schemes. You're 5 years too late. So if we could seek to sort of try and engage the uninfected herds, that's where we get the biggest gain. And we wanted to try and remove barriers to engagement and motivate vets and farmers to get involved. It's very easy to actually switch both vets and farmers off. And this sort of slide classically sort of describes it. You know, the farmer would say, well, sorry to hear about the Johne's diagnosis. Well, it's not a problem, I've just killed her already. It's actually more than just killing cows. We have actually got to actually block the transmission. And I think this blocking of transmission can be distracted by the more you test, the more the focus focuses on the test of the cow, where really the most important thing is to obviously block the transmission. So the Johne's engagement program, it was a classic sort of model: education, risk assessment, surveillance and control. So that was really what we're trying to achieve. And we had to have effort in all those 4 boxes if we were going to get success. One thing that was a very successful scheme was the Healthy Livestock Programme. This was a funded scheme that occurred in the southwest. There was a smaller scheme in the northwest. These were ones we were intimately involved in through My Healthy Herd, where a significant number of herds went through a structured programme where they undertook risk assessments using the programme, and then the vet and farmer would work together and sort out an appropriate control strategy for the herd. Let's talk a little about the successes. One of the things we did do initially was to encourage the milk recording agencies. There's three major organisations, and those 3 organisations committed to use the same ELISA test, milk ELISA test, and that was really quite important to us. We also sort of standardised the surveillance using the targeted 30-cow screen, which appeared to be a popular and economic method of screening herds. And we really wanted to try and promote engagement between commercial partners, because the farmer alone couldn't fund this. So our focus was, how could we engage farmers rather than just focus on surveillance? The more you test, the less you can, sometimes the more the test, the worse the disengagement can be. And certainly if we classify herds, then a lot of people will actually run away from the programme. So we felt it was much more important to educate the vets and farmers and seek to try and engage all those sort of herds. So important. The risk assessments and strategic controls, trying to encourage a strategic approach. I think that was very, very important. And we devised 6 control strategies that we could sensibly deploy to all herds, irrespective of their aspirations, their resources, and their prevalence. And we wanted to make sure that risk management became the central part of it, because that's how we actually control the disease. And we would need to have farm-specific solution. It goes without saying, there is no way that you can have one-size-fits-all with this disease. So by having farmer and vet-friendly approaches, we had effective communication between stakeholders. We tried to avoid onerous rules, legalities and testing burdens, and we really sort of featured on the vet-farmer engagement. And so during this period, 2010-2015, we ended up with about 300 extension meetings to about 2,500 farmers, and these were driven through the milk processes. We also had the engagement through the Healthy Livestock and those other schemes and private practices. And then the conference was renewed on an annual basis just to keep it in the press. I think that's really quite important. In 2015, we've then strengthened this with the contributions we made by some of the key participants. These are milk processors and AHDB, which is our milk levy body, and we've set up a website and we've generated a delivery team to help coordinate activities. We're also in the process of developing a technical manual. 77% of GB milk supply is signed up to the programme. We will collate results by October 2016 as to how many farmers have got to a position where they know their risks and they actually have some degree of understanding as to what control system they've got in place. This slide just illustrates the degree of collaboration. So it's very important, the Owners Action Group, any of our policies are always passed through the farming union representatives and the milk processors to make sure it's attractive and something which is actually going to be accepted. And it's very much this sort of collaborative involvement which is so important. The management plan objectives really in phase 1 were really just to look at risk and status using 30-cow screens and simple risk assessment tools, and then they would apportion themselves into one of the 6 strategies, which range from biosecurity, protect and monitor, right the way through to sort of firebreak vaccination. Phase 2 is about to begin, and this is now being prompted by BCVA, committed to an online webinar and self-assessment system where we're seeking to train a group of vets which will be able to more efficiently sign off the actual plans. So our next phase, really, with consultation with industry, it hasn't been agreed yet, but the plan would be that a BCVA trained vet is going to be in a position where they've signed off the control plan for the farmer. So we need credible vet and farmer interaction. We're seeking to sort of build and strengthen the plan. So here we are. We're January 2017. We're looking to have the vet reviewing the risks, making sure the control strategy is appropriate and signing it off, and then repeating that on an annual basis. The farmer will pay for the plan, so really he's just following the coordinated progress that the plan is defined. Okay, and the actual process, you can see, just to summarise where we've come from, we started with education and risk and status, and then we've gone to a position where we've tried to encourage that and formalise that more, but now we're actually introducing trained vets into the equation and more appropriate sign-off of the plan. So where do we want to end up? I think we want to end up with farmer and industry commercially driven solutions, commercially driven. And we need to make sure we have drivers for continued engagement. We've got to focus on robust control, that's the most important thing, and make sure we protect those low prevalence herds and provide that platform for decreasing prevalence going forward. There are some references there. You can track the programme on the Para-TB forums. Sorry, it sounds a bit self-referenced, but all this has been structured in more detail. It's available on the web, so do look for Para-TB forum. It will be there. And Mr. Chairman, hopefully I'm not too late. Here we are.
No, we'll give you a few minutes. Right. If there's time for one or two quick questions, and I'll start off and I'll ask one first, and I'll basically repeat what Mike McGann asked of Mike Collins was, you have in your abstract here, by September 2016, NJMP has progressed through further financial support for milk processors, whereupon 77% of the GB milk supply will be asked to confirm they have tested for presence and assess the risks of JG. What's going to happen to the other 23%, and how hard was it to persuade?
Well, I think so. I mean, so basically this has been driven through the milk processors. So what Dairy UK have done is that they've actually gone to the milk processors and tried to encourage them to say, well, we want you to sign up as a milk processor, to be responsible for your own milk pools, to make sure that you ensure that all your farmers sign up. So each individual milk processor has been asked, and it's not been prescriptive. Some might have 100 farmers, some might have 3,000 farmers, and they're saying, well, you must have a delivery mechanism to make sure that you can tell us how many of those farmers have actually signed up. So they put the burden of responsibility actually on the milk processor. And so the individual milk processors are signing up. So that's how it's been driven.
No more questions? Oh, sorry, can't see you. Yeah, go, can you make your way to microphone? Or are you at one?
Faster to the microphone. Where does beef come in this, Peter?
Sorry, where does beef come into it? Yeah, that is a problem. We have highlighted that. There is a risk when you have a control program in the dairy sector that you just offload the problem onto the beef sector. And so the beef sector have been watching what we've been doing, and I think that will be our next target. But it's certainly a more challenging situation. With the dairy sector, we have about 9,000 herds. With the beef sector, we've got, 70, 80,000 herds. That will be a much more difficult challenge. But the demand has really come from the dairy sector. I think because of the export markets, potential impact on export markets, that's where the current focus is for the milk processors.
Okay, one quick one now.
Peter, Steve Blowy from Sussex, Roger's brother, in case you're wondering. We seem to have a variety of results from different laboratories using different reference ranges.
Yep.
And it's very difficult to relate them. Do you have any means of grouping them all together so that you know that 4,000 relates to 0.2 and whatever the different results are from the different laboratories, please?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good question. I mean, I think it's
very confusing.
It is, and that's what we try to do. Certainly with
some of them are coming from dairies, which you haven't even asked for testing, and then they send this thing in,
Yeah.
You think, well, how does that relate to the testing? And we do testing on our own,
Yeah.
you know, individually blood testing, and they
Yeah.
don't relate to anything at all.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very, very complex sort of answer, and I can refer you. There have been some very good papers written up by Sorrel Nielsen, but you need to have a very good concentration to follow them through. But basically, the way to avoid a lot of these problems is to have one test that you repeat several times. That seems to be the philosophy we've adopted, and we try to do that with the milk test so we can seek agreement. But you will find that the culture-based test will give a different result from a serum-based test because they're looking at the different phases of infection. So that degree of confusion is very typical. It is covered in some degree of detail in the online program that BCVA have done, so I would refer to that as well.
So there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, I don't know about light at the end of the tunnel. We try and encourage people to think of any test positive animals as high risk.